English translation 863rd contact. Wednesday, the 6th of September, 2023, 11:02 HRS.
Here we are again, and today I also come to say goodbye because I must return to error. But first I will say hello to you, and we have a few things to talk about.
Of course, but you are both greeted and welcome, just as usual.
Thank you, but also be greeted.
I want to speak immediately and answer to what you told us on the 30th of August. Quetzal and I tried to find out about the behavior of the authorities in Turbenthal and the New Forester. In doing so, we discovered that two persons are exercising their office in such a manner as to be able to satisfy their power and exercise it detrimentally. Therefore, they are trying to bully you here and to harmfully prevent what you are trying to do correctly. What we have found out shows that certain persons of the authority are not well disposed towards you, although you have done what is right and have put everything in order by your untiring efforts, contrary to what the authority has omitted and failed to do its duty. We found out by looking back that all the land around, the road and all the buildings were completely dilapidated and neglected, as well as the nearby forest was completely ruined by clear-cutting. It is really incomprehensible to us that it is starting again, as it was when you took over the center and started to repair everything, the new forestation and the land, that the authorities are interfering again, whereby none of these personalities understands anything about what you have done and continue to do. We have thoroughly investigated and clarified everything that you have done in your center in Hintersh Midruti, and that you have done for the restoration and preservation of nature and for the bird life, while the authorities have in fact done nothing in any wise to change the catastrophic condition of the buildings, the land environment, and the clear-cutting of the forest for the better. We have also overheard pedestrians speaking regarding what you have brought about here, and their comments were that they did not expect to find a true paradise here, etc.
We were just, as they say here, the foreign fools here. And that is partly still the case today, and apparently also with certain members of the Turbenthal authorities. I wonder whether there are still influences from the religious sect that was responsible for my persecution all over the world, and for the 25th time that attempts have been made to get rid of me. This was the last time I was sitting in front of the house with and was shot at, although as luck would have it, the shot went into the sky. The first time was the attempt on my life in India, and that was at Merali on Dog Hill, when the projectile hit me in the left arm, and that was in the presence of Dr. Radhakrishnan, the President of India, along with Miss Rogers and Mrs. Fisk, which is why the attack was also reported to the police, who made a report.
I am aware of that, but it is really incomprehensible that the authority—
This is just the way it is. But then all through the floors everything is denied. This is not least because the culprits want to look clean and play as if they could not lift a hair. But this is the case all over the world, and everything is getting much worse, because overpopulation will produce terrible blossoms in the future, whereby the future unfortunately does not look rosy, but results in a true catastrophe for humanity. Through stupidity, the majority of Earthlings have still not grasped that horrendous overpopulation is to blame for pollution, climate change, and the destruction of all ecosystems, nature, fauna, and flora. In particular, the acting protesters, such as the Fridays for Future and the Last Generation, are were and lowly intelligent enough to understand that only a worldwide birth stop, and thus the rapid and necessary reduction of the mass of humanity, can solve the problems of planetary and environmental destruction and the continued existence of humanity. As a result of the exuberant overpopulation, the Earthlings on the whole are becoming ever more lowly intelligent, uneducated and ignorant, for more and more sects and religions and mendacious worldviews are re-emerging, promoting faith and thus illusory thinking into infinity. This also means that people's behavior is changing more and more in a negative wise, whereby, for example, more and more children and adolescents are murdering children and adolescents because they are already changing in such a negative manner that for them, life, in relation to human beings, animals, creatures, and other living beings, is no longer worth a damn. Consequently, children and adolescents have been degenerating for quite some time in the same manner as adults have been degenerating since time immemorial, smashing each other's skulls through wars and other skirmishes, and thereby enjoying legal murder, killing and destruction. Entire genocides have been committed in this way since time immemorial, with armies of military personnel being the main murdering culprits, as is unfortunately still the case today, because the Earthlings have become even worse than they were before. The development even brought about the emergence of murderer organizations, formerly so-called feudal armies, such as today's NATO and other mercenary organizations. NATO is, after all, nothing other than a mercenary murderer organization, like every military and mercenary force that used to emanate from Switzerland as well. First of all, as so-called rice runners.
What is hidden in that term?
These are men who went to war and did Reichslaufen, as it was called back then. In general, they were simply men who went into foreign military service, and were actually, in today's understanding, mercenaries in their own right. These were called mercenaires in French-speaking Switzerland and mercenary in Italian-speaking Switzerland, if I can bring it together correctly. The term Reisläufer was actually still neutral in the Middle Ages, but in the course of the early modern period it acquired a rather negative connotation, as a result of which it slowly fell into disrepute. If my memory is still correct, it was in the middle of the 18th century that a distinction arose among the Swiss people between the paddy runner and the mercenary, because the actual mercenary committed himself to military service for money. In contrast, individual military service by rice runners was neither desired nor obligated by the authorities. Rice walking was thus in the end in contrast, and was changed to a soldier service and regulated by official contracts. Rice runners used to be able to serve as individuals or in groups, which came into being in so-called free companies, whereby they voluntarily and by private contract submitted themselves to the authority of the jurisdiction of the respective foreign ruler and engaged themselves for him. But then came the time when rice running and the nature of mercenaries were banned in Switzerland and neutrality was proclaimed.
I did not know that you are full of surprises sometimes regarding what you know.
That was also foreign to me.
Then I could tell you old new things, but what I said was just part of Swiss history in my time, and that was a school subject to learn. But I wanted to say something about mercenaries, because there was the Légion étrangère of France, for example. This, as well as the Wagner mercenaries of the founder Dmitry Valerievich Utkin, who was a Secret Service agent and evil neo-Nazi, whereby Utkin took the name from the music composer Richard Wagner for his mercenary troop note. The name Wagner actually means Cartwright Cooper, wagon maker, formerly also Carter. Consequently, the troop is called Wagner Mercenaries. He is now dead, by the way, because the plane in which he was flying from Belarus to Moscow exploded on the 23rd of August 2023 near Kushinkino, Tver Oblast, together with the oligarch Yevgeny Viktorovich Prigozhin, the Wagner leader. This, while America has, among various others, the Blackwater Murder Organization, Germany also has several companies offering mercenary services worldwide, murdering and destroying for all it is worth. For example, in the Middle East and Africa, where several thousand German mercenaries are active, passionate murderers, because mercenaries and military are exactly the same thing in this respect. But the majority of peoples are also part of this, only that they murder, torture, rape and destroy in a slightly different wise, namely when they are called upon to do so by incitement, or simply flip out, or when they are ordered to do so, such as by the military. But truly, only a small proportion of human beings are exempt from this, a minority that does not murder and destroy when it hangs out on them for some reason or other, and loses patience. This, for example, those sensible human beings who concern themselves with the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, whereby at first earlier the teaching of creation energy was simply called teaching of the spirit, because the time had not yet come to eradicate the old-fashioned wrong term spirit and correctly rename it creation energy. In particular, with regard to the minority mentioned, those human beings should be mentioned who, in their righteousness, have made this teaching their own and are endeavoring to become true human beings. As a rule, These are responsible human beings who still know how to use logic, understanding, and reason, and through these can nurture and cultivate free and good, as well as open and independent thoughts. And such righteous human beings are usually, with few exceptions, Figu passive members and Figu KG members who effectively and genuinely strive to lead their lives in accordance with reality and its truth. As a result, and this has been proven many times, these human beings are much better off today than they were before they started to turn their lives around and become what they created for themselves in the wise. These are all good and righteous human beings who sincerely, willingly, and honestly, well and diligently, endeavored and continue to endeavor to become true human beings and never do anything that is contrary to the life and safety and living of any human being. These are human beings who move and live outside of what the bulk of human beings vehemently advocate, which is to take revenge and retaliate for this and that, thereby evoking death, ruin, and destruction. This makes murder and manslaughter the order of the day, in families as well as in groups, organizations, and, of course, also in the military, which is supposed to carry out regulations and bring peace and justice through attacks and wars. Murder and manslaughter, torture, rape, and destruction of all kinds, through jealousy, hatred, envy, and enmity of all kinds, as well as possessiveness and addictions of many kinds, etc., are also part of this. Robbery and theft, slander, lies and deceit, charlatanry and fortune-telling are also part of it. And first and foremost, in the worst way, all religions, sects, as well as the manifold and sometimes very disastrously lowly intelligent, false and erroneous worldviews. And more, one or the other strikes more and more frequently, because the bulk of humanity is becoming dumbed down, steadily more ignorant, losing its goals in life and already degenerating into adolescence. As a result, already children and adolescents degenerate in their ignorance, wrong thinking, envy and hatred, wantonness, and any kind of freak-out, and become asocials and murderers, etc. This is because their thoughts have been and are being condemned to faith through indoctrination. Well, in this respect, I wrote something as early as 1949, which I now recall and write down, whereby I want to read you the following from what I wrote at that time, which Svath brought to an acquaintance in America, who, as Svath said, wanted to translate my literary enjoyment into English, of which, however, I never heard anything more. Already I have retrieved some and put it on paper, and some of it I will read to you.
Verily, throughout life the human being has the choice to choose right or wrong, but it is up to each person alone, or to a group or organization, etc., to choose, in each case led by a person who, as a rule, is not of a faith and is also not fanatical, and therefore has power over his senses, consequently also with regard to reality and its truth. If, however, the wrong choice is made, then the result is that the thoughts are unfree, unwholesome, and somehow trapped. This because a belief has been built up in the human being through indoctrination, which consequently influences his thoughts continuously, and unnoticed by him through his faith. This has a constant and subterranean effect. Consequently, only an illusory thinking is made possible, which is not only alien to reality, but fundamentally unfree, unhealthy and dependent, and only pretends to be a thinking of logic, understanding and reason, but is subterraneously controlled by faith. Consequently, the whole thing can never lead to success, especially for the individual not to a successful life and true humanity. Not least because he is tempted by faith not to form his character fundamentally well. This is so that nothing evil, wrong, unbalanced, unjust and offensive, etc., lies deep in his character, which immediately erupts outwardly and has an evil effect if only the slightest cause triggers this. Also corresponding orders, as by military force and military duty or security service, etc., as well as personal agitation, incitement, agitation, selfishness, crime, anger, other freakouts, jealousy, enmity, hatred, revenge and retaliation, etc., lead quickly and thoughtlessly to murder and manslaughter. This is because violence and killing have been part of the human character from time immemorial, and are still not combated by human beings today. For example, Martin Luther's Christian Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill Moses 20.13, etc., 10 Commandments." But these commandments have been changed again and again and more, so that they correspond to the original text only partially or not at all, as is also the case in the Quran, Surah Al-Araf 6, in the name of Allah, the All-Merciful, the Merciful. In Judaism, 10 Commandments are the basis of Jewish religious law. In the Pentateuch and Exodus, too, the human-invented commandments can be found, but the best religious joke is made in the Bible with Genesis 9, Luther Bible. "Whoever sheds the blood of man, his blood shall also be shed by man. For God made man in his image." For there, the imaginary and alleged God immediately vehemently contradicts the "thou shalt not kill," namely by shedding the blood of human beings vengefully, and executing and killing the human being who himself has killed. This contradiction has spread all over the earth since ancient times, and gave birth to the death penalty, which has since been used in practically all countries of the earth, and is still practiced today in various states in a fanatical, religious, and vindictive manner, especially by religious believers and sect followers. Furthermore, the stupid and primitive claim of lies that God made human beings in his image is so ridiculous as a justification that the blood of a human being must also be demanded if the human being in question has shed human blood. A death penalty cannot be justified in a more primitive and lowly intelligent manner than that an imaginary God created human beings in his image, and this is a reason for killing, that is to say, murdering them.
Well, this is something from what I wrote then and have now retrieved, but which I still intend to retrieve and write down in full. In my opinion, the majority of Earthlings have not grown up in consciousness and with regard to reality and its truth since 1949, but only in the form of their bodies, as a result of which they cannot cultivate free, open, and independent thoughts. On the contrary, they cherish only such thoughts as make them unfree and enslave them by their erroneous and confused belief in a God, Son of God, Saint or Angel, etc., or in Satan. This burdens them so much that they can only conduct their thought work in the form of illusory thinking. This, however, leads to religious aberrations, such as in Persia or Iran, where women are whipped because they do not wear headscarves. As there and in Afghanistan, human beings are stoned and otherwise executed, and thus killed or murdered because they are not of the same mind as the religiously fanatical rulers, as I have already seen with Svath in the future, as well as many other things. But this does not concern the bulk of the peoples, and especially the rulers who slimly are only shocked and sympathetic according to their mouths, and thus only feign the pity and compassion as well as sympathy, but truthfully do not even give a clean, honest and compassionate thought to what is being done to the human beings, and they are being mistreated, tortured, sexually abused, or even killed. It is Tat.
This is exactly what we have found in our fathoms in the last few days, when we fathomed the nature and character traits of the leading state powers, especially here in Europe and America. You are actually speaking out what is effectively given, and therefore corresponds to the truth of what you mention.
Yes, and that is frightening.
I know that, because I often analyze those in power whom I watch on television and recognize from their respective facial expressions what they are really thinking within themselves, but through their mouthing of lies and deception let out other than what corresponds to the truth. Furthermore, Bermunda and I have noticed how, for example, In the case of the top government person in the neo-Nazi government of Germany, this person pretends to be false and is incapable of governing, for she is so unstable in herself that she allows herself to be indoctrinated by those elements whose Nazi-like ideas, fluff and machinations she adopts and according to whom she now also acts, but in doing so stifles her own personal views, which she unconsciously adopted some time ago.
You are a keen and good observer and analyst because what you say and...
Yes, but you do not have to say that, because on the one hand all this only brings hostility and attacks, and on the other hand everything is denied anyway. Just as the bulk of the populations do not want to see what all their rulers are really doing behind the scenes and secretly, without the population ever finding out about it, and consequently being kept dumber than stupid. Only the minority of the self-thinking and righteous make an effort to look behind the scenes of the governments, and thereby see how the people are being led around by the nose. That is to say, how some of the persons of the governing, the authorities, and the security forces exercise their might and press their thumb on the righteous citizens. Something that is partly even carried out by members of the authorities, so not only by money-grubbing and unrighteous governing and security bodies, and is also crowned with corruption. How the whole thing is brought about is, as we say, not to mention because obviously this is like a rampantly spreading disease, through which various dishonest and money-grubbing elements enrich themselves. However, this really cannot and must not be generalized, because there are also righteous rulers and members of the authorities and security agencies.
There are those, as Quetzal and I have noted, who outwardly fight the corruption of the unrighteous publicly only to cover up their own corrupt activities. And that corruption exists in all states of the earth is indisputable, also in America, which is much praised by Earth humans for its presidency, but this is concealed from the public and moreover denied. Consequently, the public is not informed of the actual truth, as Quetzal and I have discovered in the course of the last few days, and this happens in all states without exception. Effectively, Quetzal and I found that in every state on earth there was a prevalence of corruption, especially among the state leaders. The peoples of all states are also more or less lied to and deceived with regard to governmental machinations and incidents that are kept strictly under wraps and are considered secret documents and should not be made public. In addition to these findings, which we have been able to learn in the last few days as a result of our investigations, there are disputes between different parties in the state leaderships, as a result of which no unity can be achieved in decisions, and one or the other party inevitably falls behind. Obviously, here in this world, logic, understanding, and reason are not yet so far developed in any wise among human beings, and are still so primitive that these values are not able to take hold in such a manner that it is recognized that partisanship is absolutely the wrong thing to do in order to lead a state and its people. Knowing this very well, we have no party of any kind. Consequently, our error body is also free from any party system, just as there are no parties of any kind elsewhere on error.
I know that. Also that with you votes are taken solely by the vast body which represents the whole population of Era, and whose members are never the same, but at every meeting are different ones from the whole Plejaran's humanity, and also never become noisy or even quarrelsome. But we are diverting from the real issue you raised. For you spoke of corruption, which is practically commonplace in all countries throughout the world. Bermunda and I, for example, also found this in Ukraine, where we were able to see how Zelensky works in a mean manner in this respect, who corruptly rakes money into his sack and therefore only takes half-hearted and fraudulent foamy and pro forma action against corruption. He himself is deeply involved in corruption, and fills his own pockets with vast amounts of money that the lowly intelligent and other so-called helpers of the Western countries throw at him, with Germany being at the forefront in this respect. This proves that stupidity knows no bounds, not even among the neo-Nazis who sit in the German government, as is also the case with some other rulers in other countries who may not be genuine Nazis, but who imitate and align their wrong thinking in the same manner as Nazis, and so also act accordingly. Somehow, it seems to me, these human beings are so lowly intelligent, even hypocritical, that they are simply imitators of those genuine Nazis who, in their Nazi thinking, unquestioningly support Zelensky and America with arms supplies, money and ammunition, etc., and thereby promote the endless Ukraine-Russia war, and the endless murdering, destroying, torturing, and raping. Also, all the evil atrocities that Ukraine's military is indulging in are hushed up, while everything concerning the Russians is shouted out vituperatively around the world. For example, Bermunda and I saw that in one village their own Ukrainian human beings were summarily shot as they were picking things out of the rubble. We also saw that Ukrainian soldiers captured and disarmed Russian soldiers, but then shot them a short time later as well. Through Bermunda's efforts, we became aware of many of Zelensky's ploys, including the fact that, as America's lackey, he has secretly become an oligarch, although on the other hand, he hypocritically fights other oligarchs when they have something to do with Russia or are simply suspected of doing so, and collects their assets in order to allegedly finance the reconstruction of the war damages. Whereas every word is too much. Even that we found out that Zelensky, with regard to state funds, I am talking too much because it is no use anyway. Because the believers in America and Zelensky will not let themselves be taught. Because for them, Russia simply remains the enemy image. The fact that Putin started the war in Ukraine through America's fault was criminal and also despicable. But the fact that this demonizes the Russian people through false opinions and anti-Russian propaganda is simply not correct, because the majority of Russian human beings certainly do not want war. However, America, which hegemonically hopes to bring Ukraine and Russia under its world domination control at the same time, will cut its fingers, and sooner or later.
You should not say that openly because, and it is also unfortunately, Quetzal and I are called and must leave urgently. We will be back as soon as possible.
Can happen, then go, and we can continue talking about Zelensky when you get back.
We will, but how long it will take us to come back I cannot say because that has not been discussed.
It is all right. The world is not coming to an end yet. Well then.
The 9th of September 2023, 311 HRS continuation of the contact conversation of the 6th of September.
Here we are again. The whole thing took longer than we thought.
That is so. This has also delayed my return to Era.
Yes, apparently. Be welcome and greeted again, though, despite the prolonged absence.
Of course, excuse me, I omitted my greeting. Of course, I also greet you.
I want to join you on that. Excuse me.
There's nothing wrong with that. It can happen. But if it is all right with you, when you were called away, there was talk about Zelensky, whereby I wanted to say that secretly and fraudulently a lot of money flows into his own pockets. Bermunda and I could establish that without a doubt, and without a doubt. But corruption is also a given with regard to many companies and corporations involved in exploiting the planet's resources. So Svath and I, have also seen the consequences of this, that in many cases there are corrupt machinations behind the exploitation of the planet, whereby the planetary order is also out of control. Because of these exploitations, unusual shifts of the Earth's plates already occurred more than 6 decades ago. These began to shift unusually, which led to the severe earthquake in Morocco at the end of February 1960, and claimed many thousands of victims. And in this respect it must be said, it was never fathomed how many victims there actually were, namely very many more than was estimated, as exact clarifications by Ascot revealed. I saw this with her at the time when I asked her if she could take me there where we looked at the whole thing. And what happened then will happen again in the next few days, claiming thousands of human lives again, this time in parts of the Atlas Mountains. The quake is something that is connected with the machinations of the Earthlings, and is partly unnaturally generated, which is of course denied by the seismologists, etc., because they want to know everything better. This, like the climate, that is to say the climate change, was created by the irresponsible Earth humans' machinations. And this because the mass of the unstoppably growing overpopulation needed more and more products, whose raw materials for the production of these products were snatched from the earth, which then also poisoned the atmosphere through their exhaust fumes, CO2 and other pollutants, waste and rubbish, etc., and finally thereby produced the change, that is to say, the destructive change of the climate. As a result, the climate began to go crazy, and since then huge storms have been sweeping through all countries, causing gigantic destruction, but also costing many human lives, as is currently happening not only in the north and south of Europe, but also in America, South America, Canada, and Africa. If I remember correctly, Libya will also be hit by such a storm in the near future, and thousands of human lives will be lost. However, I do not remember exactly what it will be. The sea will play a nasty role in it, as well as something that will be damaged. Now, the constant and unconscionable as well as irresponsible huge exploitations of the Earth's resources, the greedy and excessive exploitation of the planet for monetary gain by companies and corporations that bring about these machinations through the greed of overpopulation, have all brought bad consequences for the climate and the Earth, and they will bring much worse. I know this from Svath, who was also able to prove the whole thing to me and let me see many things. Also the very great danger in the middle of the 2030 AS, when the whole Earth will be threatened. I know this because he let me see what will happen then, as well as what will ultimately be the evil consequence of this. If the Earth's petroleum, iron and coal, gases and metals of various kinds, etc., continue to be robbed from the Earth. In addition, I know that a much greater negative effect is being exerted on the entire Earth, and of course on the Earth's plates, than the geologists and other scientists suspect and claim. Obviously, they know nothing at all about how damaging, dangerous, and destructive. The whole exploitation of the Earth's resources is for the planet itself, and creates an imbalance on it, as this also affects the Earth's plates, which normally rub against each other, or push over each other, whereby slight earth tremors up to very severe earthquakes can be the result. Something that also happens naturally and is normal for the planet. However, as a result of the immense exploitation of the Earth's resources, the entire relationship of the natural planetary relationships is out of kilter, resulting in natural occurrences that can only be attributed to the ignorance and guilt of human beings. This means, of course, that not only the planet, but also all its ecosystems, and thus of course nature with all its fauna and flora, as well as the atmosphere and the climate, are affected and badly affected. There are many other evil and negative things to be mentioned, such as what is to be said about the corona rampantly spreading disease, which was declared to be over due to the unreasonableness and incompetence of those in power, but which still exists and has not been fully combated.
Hello, I had to remove something here due to YouTube's rule. Please check the links below to read the full contact note and get what was omitted.
In the case of malaria tropica, it even took about 100 years until the first vaccine was found, although I do not know how or whether it is effective at all. It should also be said that in future it will be claimed, which is already almost a done deal, that the corona rampantly spreading disease originated with a species of bat, because under no circumstances should it be made noisy that the American, together with Mao Zedong, hatefully developed the corona disease in Chinese laboratories from the mid-1970s onwards, causing thousands of mutations and already costing human lives. Before, long after the death of the two authors, the rampantly spreading disease finally broke out in 2019 as a result of an accident, preceded by several others, and began to spread worldwide, becoming a pandemic. But it will be because America is such a liar that since time immemorial, it has brought nothing but disaster and ruin upon the world and obscures everything from the truth, more and more and in such a way that ultimately the monstrous lie claimed to have recognized the alleged origin of the epidemic will circle around the planet as fact, namely that it was clearly a rampantly spreading disease that had originated from bats or other animals. This will happen in the future because everything will be denied and twisted in such a way, because the truth is simply not supposed to be true, that an American full of hate together with the Chinese president Mao Zedong had the rampantly spreading disease created by laboratories in order to wipe out large parts of the U.S. population. But whether this is of interest to those who believe everything that is lies and deception and lift hegemonic America high into the sky is not in question. However, the effective fact is that the American minority of the righteous of the people is not the same as all the unrighteous who create evil altogether, especially false freedom fighters who also support the murderous organization NATO, which was created by Harry S. Truman only to indulge in hegemony under the guise of peacemaking and democracy building. The whole thing is a pack of lies, one of the frauds perpetrated on Earth's humanity, which neither the indoctrinated U.S. populace nor the pro-America people of the world are aware of, which is why all the lowly intelligent, the fake thinkers who cheer America and the murderous organization NATO, are falling for it. This is despite the fact that America is already in control of many of the world's states, which do as they are told. Just take the example of Zelensky in Ukraine, who is murdering and destroying according to American models and orders, with weapons and ammunition that are being supplied to the war. Fanatic Zelensky unthinkingly and irresponsibly as well as criminally by like-minded Americans, whereby, however, thousands of human beings are being murdered.
What you have learnt from my brother Svarth, and also seen and experienced during all the journeys and many years in the earthly past and future, which was never otherwise possible for an Earth human and will never be in the future, that is actually more than a human being is capable of coping with. But you were still able to do this, and you remained modest in doing so, just as you also did not gain any financial or other profit from your extensive work. This in contrast to, as I have fathomed, to whom you have indeed shown the way a business has been made of it, as also this in order to.
Yes, I know, but to say that openly would bring me trouble because the truth is not heard gladly, and therefore legal action would be initiated immediately if I were to say openly what really is. I have experienced this several times, which is why I have also learned to keep silent in this regard, as it was necessary from my childhood onwards and has continued throughout my life. But we are talking about something else, namely that among the earthlings, that is to say, the human beings of the earth, there are many who are always, and with everything in the front line, and want to be the biggest and the best. Something that I myself, however, do not want for my person. Many people are infected with movie horniness, that is to say, film horniness, photo horniness, or some other kind of horniness of being seen, so that they push themselves into the foreground everywhere, and thus cheat their way to the front, so that they are seen and admired and appear to be important. But that does not suit me, because I want to stay in the background and quietly do my work and not be adored. Unfortunately, this happens all too quickly, both for good and for bad, precisely because human beings are idolized. But I want to say that if a human being does something that helps fellow human beings in some wise, or if, for example, a human being brings something valuable that fellow human beings can learn, and as a result they are better off and understand life better, then he is adored. Or it may simply be that a human being openly teaches reality and truth, or he says what life really is, how it should be good and led in order to live rightly. And when I thus bring the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, then with absolute certainty, those human beings are very grateful when they learn this and can use it for themselves and make their life and existence happy, good and contented, which is after all part of the purpose of the whole. That human beings are then grateful, that is clear and self-evident, but to see something special in me because of this is neither correct, good, nor in any other way appropriate. For as is known today, I did not simply receive the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life. For every iota of knowledge and ability, all the heralds of Nocodemian's teaching have had to work up again and again for 9 billion years, corresponding to the respective time, out of their own creation energy within themselves. So I too had to work out the teaching for myself through hard training and learning according to today's value and understanding. Just as every other normal human being must also laboriously learn everything himself, and keep it in his consciousness for the time of his development for his life. But he can only do this if he keeps on learning and never gives up in this respect. This is something I learned very early in my life, on the one hand from my mother and father, and on the other hand also from Svarth, who were very good teachers to me. If I go on to say something about the whole thing, it is that as soon as the human being does something that does not suit others, is not understood, cannot be comprehended, is envied, or simply does not fit, etc., Hostility immediately arises, even though no one is inconvenienced or offended by it or comes to harm. It doesn't matter what it is about and how insignificant everything is, why the victim is attacked or maltreated. Because the only thing that matters is that the victim should somehow be harmed, harassed, or even killed because someone else simply doesn't like what they are doing. This very quickly leads to insults. Harassment, destruction, or fights are instigated, or even attacks on life are committed, and those who are hated or simply envied for some sick and idiotic reason are murdered.
This is well known to me, for we Plejarians learn from our earliest adolescence that such behavior can never appear, for it has been known to us from time immemorial that this is a characteristic of those human beings who are selfish, as was the case with our ancestors in earlier times. However, when this was investigated and the reason was found that it was a form of jealousy and selfishness, then a subject of teaching was created in this respect, which became a duty of learning for every person in order to prevent the evil from arising. Therefore, it also became compulsory that even the adolescent is confronted with it and learns that this unworthy of man kind of behavior is learnt to combat at an early age in such a way that it already dissolves in its origins, and it can never become a factor that can become a reality.
I learned that myself from Svath.
To this I remember well how inquisitive you were, and how you used to besiege my brother with questions tirelessly.
That was just the way it was, because I was interested in everything even then, and that is how I remain to this day. Here is an email for you to read, although I haven't read anything except the beginning.
Subject: Background and inquiry about a prophecy date. The 8th of September 2023 at 21 hour 5 minutes and 8 seconds. Cest to Elizabeth.
Hello, Elizabeth. How are things with you? Is everyone healthy and well? We are preparing for a 2-week holiday and hope to have a restful time. The reason for my writing is that a prophecy is occupying my thoughts, also caused by the current situation here in Europe. Billy mentions, among other things, that the Russian bear will liberate Europe. I hope I have not misunderstood this statement. However, the main question for me is how such a system from Russia, which many human beings know because of earlier unpleasant experiences during the Cold War with the cruel Soviet doctrine, should accept and free it from the US doctrine. What makes this Rus? What makes this Russian system better than other totalitarian systems, for example, China, Iran, USA, North Korea? Am I on the wrong track with my considerations, and what am I overlooking? At the moment, it is not obvious that the behavior of the Russian government has many friends, let alone friends. At present, it is not clear that the behavior of the Russian government has many friends, let alone that the current Russian system under the existing leadership is superior. Let alone that the current Russian system under the existing leadership presents itself as superior and desirable to the West. Have you received any further explanations from Billy that make this prophetic statement comprehensible and appear in the correct light? In the future, serious and positive changes will have to take place in the East and in Russia, which will make this liberation possible, although military gayvolt will be used. It is rather to be expected that under the current conditions the Western Europeans will not rejoice over a Russian liberation, and certainly not if another totalitarian system is to establish itself here. Therefore, for me, this question and how this liberation is to take place, and with final long-term acceptance, still remains unclear. Do you have some further information for me on this, or is there possibly the possibility of getting some sparking impulses from Billy on this? I think this prophecy deserves to be understood correctly and the space for speculation kept as small as possible. I would be very grateful for a little thought support. Thank you very much in advance. Best wishes, and Salome C.
Salome Billy, may I ask you what you would answer here?
My opinion on this: Russia has developed through the opening up and the good, far-sighted political actions of Gorbachev. Russia does not claim to want to subjugate the world, unlike the USA. Russia is striving for a multipolar world order in which each state retains its sovereignty. This is evident from the information that Russia does not interfere and does not wage wars of subjugation, with the exception of the invasion of Ukraine, where Putin did not know how to help himself other than to assert himself in this wise, which was of course very counterproductive, because in this way he played into the hands of the authors of the whole misery, and they could, and still can, turn almost the whole world against Russia. Of course, they currently have the trump cards in their hands, which they are exploiting to the full. As we know from reliable information on the part of the Pleiarans, the war would have ended after only 16 days without much bloodshed if Germany had not opposed it. It is true that Russia allowed itself to be rushed into a war, which is inexcusable, because war is always and without exception the most evil thing that humanity can instigate, and which never brings peace. This in contrast to the lying assertions, for war brings out the worst degenerations in human beings, accumulates and increases them immeasurably. This even though the causal cause is not to be found in Russia, as we know. When and how the prophecies will arrive, if they arrive at all in the announced form, we do not know. We core group members have no other information.
Very obviously there is not much thought put into the question because I missed that here. After all, as I have read everything, it is clear and evident from the prophecy that it has been fulfilled.
That is indeed the case when I recall it from my memory. But you can put this in writing for your perusal, and add it to our conversation when you recall this and write it down, please.
Of course, just a moment, please. I want to retrieve it, but I have to have the book first. Here, I have it there. Just a moment, effectively. I cannot find it in there. Nothing. But I think I will ask Bernadette. She is always great in such things. I can rely on her. So I will insert this prophecy here in our conversation when she gives it to me on a stick.
If you think so, then add it.
America and Europe will tremble when freedom comes from the East with a hard hand, which is oppressed from America and Europe, but which will be punished by a hard teaching, for the sense of world domination which they wickedly cherish and thus put countries and peoples into dictatorships. The Great Bear will come, who will bring freedom, Russian land, which will put down all the unfreedom that rings out of many mouths in America and Europe, as it does in many other countries around the world. But the bear from the East will destroy it and settle the whole thing into peace and freedom. But it will take a long time until then, with lamentations that are carried out into the world with tears. Because evil terrorism, dictatorship, hatred, and war deny peace and freedom victory. Might and greed for world domination are tearing the world apart, and in many countries there are even death cries because America and Europe are carrying out unfreedom and beating the human beings with war, need, and misery. The peacemakers whose actions are based on might are taught by the bear and told that claims to world power stir up evil strife, which leads humanity to death and ruin. Therefore, the bear will tear apart all the evil of America, and it will also promise the same to Europe. When wars violently destroy everything in the world, crisscrossing from the world striking America, when the same echoes from the European dictatorship and cries of murder resound from evil terrorism, then the bear will start to bite at the strife, and this will tear apart the evil doings of the Western powers.
The 7th of July, 1949.
The prophecy... Wait, this should actually be said once for the sake of understanding. A prophecy is generally but from time immemorial misunderstood by human beings. This is because a prophecy is actually a threat and not a prediction, but also a reminder that people should not continue to muddle along in the same bad manner as they have done up to now, because otherwise a negative result will result. It is to be said that a prophecy is something that predicts what can happen, especially when everything is done and acted in the same manner as it is done at present and also in the future, so that the result is what the prophecy warns. If, however, the whole course of action changes for the better, and everything is henceforth done in accordance with correctness. Then a prophecy referring to it will not be fulfilled. For then what was prophesied will not be fulfilled, and everything will change into something better. Then everything will be good. Now, as far as a prediction is concerned, it is based on an effective certainty of a thing or an event, etc., that is unchangeable and will be true and come true or happen with 100% certainty if everything has been done, that is to say, done correctly. On the other hand, a prediction inevitably comes true and cannot be influenced, changed or stopped with the best words, efforts, actions, and thus with the greatest efforts or with the highest attainable willpower of thought or otherwise. A prediction is based on something that will come to pass and thus happen under all circumstances, and this also when everything possible speaks against its fulfillment. This should be said and explained once, so that human beings may correctly understand the difference between prophecy and prediction. What is to be said in clarification with regard to prophecy concerning Russia applies to all prophecies about Russia that I have written, for all of them have become null and void, and that because everything has changed for the best through correct words and correct action. This is precisely because everything has turned out in such a manner that what the prophecies warned about has turned out to be good through a total improvement and transformation. And for the fact that everything changed and resulted for the best and good, a responsible man appeared in the USSR in 1985, who consciously and courageously stood up for the fact that security and, in many cases, freedom and peace were spreading in the West. This happened especially in Germany, but also in East Germany. The GDR dictatorship, which collapsed, made everything possible, which were able to reunite. The big thank you for this today is criminally provided by those depraved neo-Nazis in the German government who supply weapons, etc. to Zelensky, and thereby perpetuate the war and murder in Ukraine, costing many thousands of human lives. But all these ethically and morally severely depraved neo-Nazi elements in the government of Germany do not care, because they do not, yet, have to take the rap for their own heads, which particularly concerns certain megalomaniac, inexperienced and partisan, as well as lousy neo-Nazi elements in the top incompetent German leadership and foreign ministry. However, the fact that America is behind the war in Ukraine in the first place, but covertly and secretly, and that it is arranging everything, is deliberately kept strictly quiet. Namely, it did not fit into America's craving for hegemony that it could not bring its NATO to Ukraine because Russia was against it and vehemently defended itself. Already in the past, contrary to the promise that NATO would not expand against Russia's borders, this promise was broken and finally everything was thrown overboard. Consequently, country after country was taken over and NATO spread and settled in, of course secretly arranged by America. So, America's NATO desire eventually led to war in Ukraine, which, caught up in hegemony mania, wanted to put its NATO on Russia's doorstep, but Russia resisted until Russia's leadership ran out of patience, and Putin, with their consent, unleashed the war in Ukraine. Of course, this was and is a crime, as every war was and is today, as it will also be tomorrow and into the distant future. But if Russia had not started this war in Ukraine, America would have done so in a much worse way. Just think of the crimes of the American military and of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the last World War from 1939 to 1945. Truly, the Nazis did catastrophically bad, inhuman and criminal things. But what America has done in bringing the atomic age into being and developing and using the atomic bomb is far more evil and worse, which will be carried further into the future. It is now to be said that if many countries had not been incited by America against Russia, especially Germany and the EU dictatorship, to supply weapons etc. to the warmonger Zelensky, then nuclear munitions etc. would have been used immediately by America, which would have caused a worse catastrophe and had worldwide consequences than these which already are. And that is absolutely certain, and actually the world can thank you that it was not America that started the criminal war, but Russia. If America had launched the war, together with its NATO, which is actually directed by America in the background, then many things would simply have been matai at the end, and several millions and even billions of human beings would no longer be alive. And this is also to be said, if it had not been for America, and if it had not incited other governments and peoples against Russia, and if mercenaries had not been called upon to intervene in Ukraine, which quickly happened, with even Swiss people going to Ukraine as mercenaries, because Zelensky quickly built on a mercenary force. Then the war would have been dead and over in 16 days. But hegemonistic America was not interested in this because the hegemony mania simply did not allow it. This, however, is not the fault of the righteous Americans, but only affects those human beings in America who go along with the hegemony and agree with what the government and shadow government are doing in this respect. But why the prophecies did not come true, and everything turned out differently is, as I said, because everything changed for the better, and none of the prophecies made are valid anymore, because everything changed and turned for the good. With regard to the actual how and why, it is necessary to elaborate a little further and say the following, some of which I have taken from Wikipedia, but which I will formulate briefly. In 1985, President Mikhail Gorbachev came into the picture and was the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, CPSU, from March 1985 to August 1991, the Soviet Union, being a state in Eastern Europe and in Asia from 1922 to 1991, the abbreviation USSR standing for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics known as the Soviet Union, it was regarded as the terror of the whole world, so to speak. Gorbachev was a radical reformer and was concerned not to abolish socialism, but to revive it and transform it into an efficient system. He propagated glasnost openness and perestroika restructuring, and he was in favor of more freedoms and also more responsibility for each human being. Through his efforts, he forced the reforms of the economic crisis, as well as the mass flight of human beings to the West, but also the peaceful demonstrations of the citizens of the GDR brought about the end of the GDR dictatorship. In order to save the existence of the Soviet Union, President Mikhail Gorbachev reached for autocracy, for which purpose the People's Congress then authorized him to dissolve the parliaments of the constituent states and to govern himself, relying on the army and secret police, the opponents of a possible reform of the USSR, which however did not come about due to Gorbachev and his very initiative. And that through his efforts the unification of Germany and its eastern part, the GDR, came about as East Germany, when the GDR dictatorship was ended and abolished. That part of the present government of Germany miserably returned the favor, the part of the neo-Nazis of the government, by supplying weapons etc. to Zelensky, which are used against Russia, which has been demonized since time immemorial and recently even more so by America. Effectively, Gorbachev, and thus Russia, changed everything for the better, so that the West and the world no longer felt threatened by the USSR, and a freedom and peace emerged, which made the populations of Earth loosen up because the dangers emanating from the USSR were no more. There was now a certain freedom and a form of peace that had not been possible for a long time because the enmity between America and Russia alone prevented it. But as America continued to live under hegemony mania, it sought to finally cut Russia off from the West with a nasty NATO intervention in Ukraine, which Russia's Security Council did not put up with and gave Putin free rein. But the idiotic rulers, mainly of America-friendly Western countries, who let themselves be blinded by America, fell for its trickery, lies, and deceit. And in doing so, they are causing such immeasurable damage, without thinking about reality and its truth. That is pre-programming the coming disaster, which can only be prevented if the effective truth is still recognized and acted upon. All the governments and populations of those countries that have been and continue to be taken in by America's machinations, that is to say its government and shadow government, are doing everything they can to give their underhanded efforts and wishes all the help they can, consequently aiding and abetting strife and secret service murders and wars. And this will continue until it is finally realized that America and its murderous organization NATO exist in a delusion of hegemony that will stop at nothing and cash in on the whole world if it is not powerfully countered and the world domination airs are not finally ended.
However, the leaders of many earthly states are too blinded to recognize the truth. Quetzal and I have clearly fathomed and recognized this in our exploration of the attitudes, abilities, and behavior of the leaders of all Earth's states. This is what we have been mainly concerned with over the last few days, and we have also realized that only very few of the leaders are capable of effective and just governance. The majority of these persons in all states are only educated to such an extent, if one can speak of education at all, that they are capable of exercising their power over the populations without guiding them righteously.
It is indeed logic, reason, and sanity that are staggeringly minimal that such incompetent persons are appointed to state leaderships.
The Earthlings are just believers of religions, sects and world believers, and thus not reality thinkers and truth thinkers. Consequently, it is also not possible for them to recognize who, how, and what the human being is whom they elect and idolize, put their trust in him, as they do with their imaginary God who can do nothing and nothing at all, neither in good nor in evil. And it is similar with the majority of those in power, who make the people unfree and enslave them with ever new laws, regulations, ordinances, and the use of power, etc., instead of making them truly free and peaceful, namely by instructing them in this respect, so that they then really preserve freedom and peace. But I have something else. Someone telephoned and asked me if I knew when the first flowering plants appeared on Earth. I just said that Svath and I first saw flowers about 320 million years ago. Then the first flowering bushes about 260 million years ago. So now I'm wondering if you have any other findings on that.
For my part, I cannot explain anything to you about this, because I did not do as my brother Svath did with you, that you did research so far in the past. My activities in this regard relate only to some 18 millennia, but not to millions of years, and even more.
Also, I have to stay out of your question with an answer, because I myself have never researched past times that go back more than about 3 millennia. And if I have, it was done for clarifications.
Then it was not. I could not know that because we have effectively never talked about it. But what do you two think about the immigration of human beings from the South and from Asia to Europe? The welcome culture, which was launched by the German President Angela Merkel when she was in office, has already taken on exuberant proportions in Europe, as it has in America, and has also caused thousands of deaths so far, usually drowning at sea, etc. At that time, it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. I was talking about 250 to 350 million human beings fleeing and leaving their homeland. It was not yet as bad as it is nowadays, because gangs of smugglers are at work and lead masses of refugees to their death or to Nordic countries for immense sums of money. What do you think about this?
This is much more than just criminal, because it also affects the relationship of the local population in those countries where the refugees settle. Besides, as I know, there are many criminal persons among the refugees, as well as children without or with their mothers.
About this, I am only aware of what is reported here on Error. Consequently, I cannot comment on it in a wise as you probably hope. Besides, the time has come for me to take my leave soon, so there are a few things I want to discuss with you that you should neither retrieve nor write down later.
So be it. What is it that you still want to discuss? Maybe you can come here again, so that we can talk to each other undisturbed, like the last few days, without me calling up the conversation later and writing it down.
That will not be the case because